As a society, narratives shape our world. They challenge the representation of truth and construct our identity. This is seen through the novel Atonement, the film Stories We Tell, and the short story The Yellow Wallpaper. In McEwan's Bildung's Roman novel Atonement, Bryony assumes the role of the omniscient narrator, seemingly unconscious that her own perspective is subjective, narrow, and highly suspect. She is morally grey and often lies for the sake of attention. This makes her unreliable. This is evident in the fountain scene as she perceives Robbie asserting power over Cecilia. By making these assumptions, Bryony reveals herself as being unable to separate her imagination from her perception. This skews the representation of truth as she influences the reader to believe what she is saying. At the end of the novel, Bryony narrates Cecilia and Robbie meeting again, then reveals that they in fact died. This temporal distortion reveals the subjectivities of Bryony's psyche as she attempts to shelter herself from the traumatic reality. Bryony is telling this story to herself to construct her identity as better than it is. Bryony spends a large amount of time writing stories and creating an imaginary world to construct her own identity. The world not one she could make, but the one that made her. This shows how McEwan conveys the human identity shaped by the environment, even as it is shaped by it. Her identity started off as a naive young girl who was an aspiring playwright. However, her imagination created a detrimental misunderstanding. Her childish stories reflect her innocent nature despite the internal struggle of swinging between childhood and maturity. The events in children's stories lead her to misinterpret the real life and as a result of this transform her imagination into a destructive force on the world around her. Sarah Polley's Stories We Tell represents truth as layers, contributing to one narrative. The documentary is subjective, artificial, and multifaceted, demonstrating that truth is constructed and ideological. The handheld camera footage throughout the documentary shows the authenticity before revealing it to be reenactments, foregrounding the notion of truth. Diane's life is conveyed through the perspectives of many people close to her through interviews, the juxtaposition of real and fake footage, participatory, documentary style, and grainy home video sequences. After Harry tells a story about hugging Michael at the funeral, Sarah asks Michael, "Do you remember meeting Harry there?" Then his reply, "No, I didn't meet him there," brings a deliberate textual ambiguity to the viewer's attention. The subjective layering attempts to capture whole truth using different perspectives, mocking how easily the audience is manipulated and persuaded based off the constructed notion of having an objective truth. On a larger scale, Sarah constructs her own narrative to provide closure for her dissatisfaction about her biological father. The director's search for identity through recognizing her father and gaining a more mature understanding of her mother is the subplot of the film. She never uses her own narrative power to comment on this process of obscuring the truth, having the story being told for her and shaping her world. At the end of the film, it is revealed that Jeffrey Bowers, and Diane did sleep together once. This forces the viewer to participate in the questioning of Sarah's identity throughout the whole narrative. The gap in Sarah's identity came from her childhood alienation of her father, but this gap takes on a metafictive capacity to build her identity as she comes to know Harry as her father. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman explores the representation of truth through its unreliable narrator. Over the course of the text, she becomes incomprehensible, devolving of her narrative voice and therefore increasingly unreliable. Jane's perception of reality is limited due to her nervous disorder and the treatment rescuer. These methods of isolation force her to hallucinate in the process of fragmenting. She states, "It is the same woman, I know, for she is always creeping." This suggests that she has formed relationships with her hallucinations that embody herself. No one is listening to her, as she is denied the ability to represent herself. She is less able to tell her story, which coincides with the loss of identity. Jane is unreliable like Bryony, but not because she is communicating may not be true, but her increasingly unbalanced perspective of the situation. Jane fights a battle of identity in The Yellow Wallpaper. The struggle to interpret reality constitutes the loss of the crucial part of her identity, which mediates her relationship to the world. She perceives herself through John's patriarchal narrativization as a feminine object. He has complete control over her through the justification of his poor behavior and embodies the patriarchal expectations about a woman's role in marriage. John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. She is denied communication from anyone and prevented from representing her identity, but what is one to do, she states, as she doesn't know what to do about feeling helpless. Jane gets worse every day as being in a confined space. Her identity is eaten away until she assumes a new role behind the wallpaper. Narratives, although central to our worlds, are not the truth, but a representation of it from a limited perspective or perspectives. Truth is imperative for one to have a sense of identity which is basis on the stories of who we are and the way we think of ourselves.